Welcome to Wildcat Science with Mrs. Haugo. This is Chapter 7, Part 2 on the skeletal system. We left off talking about bone growth. Bone growth begins as a fetus and it continues until the person is a young adult, and even as adults, your bones are actively repairing themselves all the time. As an embryo, the skeleton is completed, but it's completely cartilage, so it's your skeleton but no bones, just cartilage. And then ossification starts to happen. This is the process of changing cartilage to bone. And that starts to happen, the ossification, when the embryo is 2 to 3 months, so during the first trimester. So osteoblasts, which are your bone building cells, secrete the matrix, which is the material between the cells. If you remember, cartilage and bone are both types of connective tissue, which has living cells in a matrix. So the matrix for bones has a lot of collagen, which if you remember is a protein fiber, and also calcium deposits and other minerals, which make it hard. So looking more into bone growth, once your matrix hardens, the osteoblasts become osteocytes, so the bone builders become bone cells. Osteocytes are living cells that maintain the matrix, and they live in the lacunae. Once a bone is formed, new bone growth occurs at the epiphyseal plate until late teens or early 20s, and then after that, this process only occurs with bone remodeling, so when your bones are repairing themselves. So let's take a look at some pictures of ossification. So as an embryo, the bone starts out as no bone, but a cartilaginous model of what the bone will look like. And then the bone starts to form. You see here a developing periosteum, which is the membrane. And then you have some osteoblasts starting to secrete the hard matrix, and this is calcified cartilage. And you can see you have in the third picture, compact bone is developing here in what will become the diaphysis, and you have a primary ossification center. As you can see, there's lots of blood vessels nourishing the bone. And then as the fetus becomes older, you get secondary ossification centers at the epiphysis and the medullary cavity, and the compact bone has formed. And then after the baby is born and is a child, you have the epiphyseal plate, and that is where the bone growth occurs. And then as an adult, you have the remnant of the epiphyseal plate where it's sealed off and there's no longer growing happening there, but that's where it did happen. The process is still occurring with adults as bones are remodeling themselves and repairing themselves all the time. A quick review of some of the terms we've already learned. So this is an example of a long bone, and it has compact bone, and the marrow, the yellow marrow, is found in the medullary cavity, and then spongy bone is found at the epiphysis, and then is covered with articular cartilage. We're going to talk about a very important topic, the homeostasis of bone tissue. And as you know, homeostasis in your body is supremely important. So one process is resorption, which is the breakdown of bone tissue. You may be wondering why your body would ever want to break down bone tissue. Well, breaking down is important for bone remodeling, bone repair, and if the body needs stored minerals. For example, your nervous system and your muscle system both need calcium to work, and if it doesn't have enough, it will take it from your bones. So osteoclasts, with a CL, break down bone tissue. Bone resorption and bone formation are opposing processes that regulate the total bone mass. So osteoblasts are your bone builders, and they are responsible for bone formation. And that process is regulated by vitamin D and hormones, the hormone parathyroid hormone, estrogen hormone, and testosterone hormone. And just remember, there are three words here: osteoclasts, crash the bone down, they break down the bone. Osteoblasts are your bone builders, and then osteocytes are your bone cells. We'll talk a little bit more about the homeostasis of bone tissue when we talk about homeostasis of calcium. So let's jump into skeletal system functions. A major function is to form a framework for your body. And you can see down here in the picture, the bones are forming the framework for that body. So bones shape and support the entire body. For example, bones of the lower limbs, pelvis, and vertebral column support your body's whole weight. Another skeletal system function is to protect the internal organs and tissues. So the cranium and facial bones will protect the eyes, the ears, and then the brain. The rib cage and shoulder bones help protect the heart and lungs, and the bones of the pelvis protect the lower abdominal and internal reproductive organs. Another skeletal system function is the bones work with muscles to produce movement. The bones and muscles interact like levers to make limbs or other body parts move. So looking at the picture, the bones work like a lever using the muscle, and then here is the point of the lever, the joint, and then the load, and then the effort. So looking at your bone, you have your humerus, radius, and ulna are working with the biceps to make the muscle move, bringing the radius and the ulna closer to the humerus. A fourth skeletal system function is to produce blood cells. Hematopoiesis is the process of blood formation, and this occurs in red marrow, which again is found in spongy bones in the epiphysis. So hematopoiesis forms erythrocytes, which are red blood cells, leukocytes, which are white blood cells, and thrombocytes, which are blood platelets. The fifth and final skeletal system function we're going to talk about is it stores calcium, which is used by other systems. The body needs calcium ions for many things. For example, blood clot formation, sending nerve impulses, and muscle cell contraction. When blood calcium levels are low, your thyroid gland will release a hormone. This hormone tells the osteoclasts to resorb bone, which will release calcium into the blood. When blood calcium levels are high, your parathyroid gland will release a different hormone, and this different hormone tells the osteoblasts to take calcium ions from the blood and form bone tissue, storing calcium into the bones. And then in both cases, the calcium ion levels return to normal. At this point, we're going to talk about bone calcium regulation a little more, and you should get out your worksheet and fill it out as we're going along. So homeostasis is the name of the game, and as you know, we want to keep the blood calcium levels right at that set normal value. And right here, blood calcium levels return to normal, your body is in homeostasis. Sometimes calcium levels, blood calcium levels are high. So the calcium is consumed and blood level calciums increase. Let's say you drank a gallon of milk. So then your thyroid gland releases a hormone, and it's actually calcitonin, and which tells your osteoblasts to take the calcium in the blood and deposit the calcium into your bones. And that brings the blood calcium levels back to normal. Sometimes your blood calcium levels are too low. You haven't been getting enough calcium in your diet, for instance. And then your parathyroid gland will release a different hormone called parathyroid hormone and tell the osteoclasts to break down bone to release the calcium into the blood, and then your blood calcium levels are returned to normal. So a good note to make is if you are not getting enough calcium in your diet, your body needs it in the blood to go to different systems, so it will steal it from your bones, which will cause problems later on down the road. So do make sure you're getting enough calcium in your diet. You know, dairy products and also green leafy vegetables are great sources of calcium. Okay, now that we've talked about the 5 functions of the skeletal system, we're going to delve a little bit more into the bones themselves. Bone markings, actually bumps and holes. So bones have markings, projections, that's what that word says, or depressions that help form joints, are a point of attachment for tendons and ligaments, and we know tendons are used to attach muscles to bone, and they allow the passages of blood vessels and nerves. So projections are your bumps, bony bumps that provide sites for ligament and tendon attachments or that make joints. One type of projection is a head. It is a rounded knob-like end separated by the rest of the bone by a neck or slender region. An example is the head of the femur. So looking again here, you can see that you have a rounded knob-like end separated by the rest of the bone by a neck, which is a slender region. Another projection is a process. A process is a large projection on a bone. An example is the spinous process on a vertebrae. So here's our vertebrae, and you can see here that there is a large projection, and that is called the spinous process. This is a place for muscle and tendon and ligament attachment. So muscles through tendons, tendon and ligament attachment, spinous process. And then looking back at the head of the femur, this is very important for the formation of a joint, for articulation. So more projections. One of them is a condyle. And a condyle is a rounded projection, knuckle-like, where bone articulates with another bone. And an example is the mandibular condyle. So if you look at our cranium, we have the mandible right here, and then up here you have the mandibular condyle, which articulates with some of the cranial bones and helps with the joint that opens your mouth. So a small condyle on a condyle is called an epicondyle, and we find those in like our humerus. Another projection is a crest, a distinct border or ridge such as over a bone. An example is the iliac crest, and the iliac crest is a crest on the ilium, which is the part of the hip bone. So you see we have the ilium, and then we have the iliac crest, which is up and over the pelvic bone. Another type of projection is a spine. So we're not talking about your vertebrae. It's a sharp projection on the surface of a bone. So one example is the spine of the scapula. And if you notice, we have an addition here, and here is the scapula, and then here is a sharp projection off of the scapula, and that is a spine, the spine of the scapula.